Hello, and welcome to the KubeBuilder Controller Runtime and Controller Tools meeting for Thursday, November 5th, 2020. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to YouTube eventually, so don't say anything you don't want recorded for all posterity. All right, so it looks like we have a few items on the agenda. Looks like the first is from Joe about server-side apply. So why don't you get started with that, Joe?
Okay, sounds good. I have a couple of visual aids, so I'm going to just share my screen really quick. It's not like a presentation or anything, but hopefully, can everybody see that?
Yep, middle of the
Yes, I can see.
Yeah, it looks like
split screen.
Okay, hold on, let me fix that. That's not what I intend to do. Let's just do this. Is that better? I'll try and present.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so what's going on is we want to add support for server-side apply in Kubernetes Client Go implementation, which really doesn't have apply right now. The only way that you can call apply right now is if you use the untyped client and you provide a byte array of whatever you want to apply. So that's not a great experience for controllers, which typically want like a type-safe programmatic way of doing this. So what I'm going to be doing is discussing some options on how we would support that. Just for reference, that's what plain old Go structs look like. I think we're all pretty familiar with that. On the left, you have what the structs would look like for like a Kubernetes native type. On the right is the corresponding YAML. I'll be showing some other slides of other examples in the same format. So why can't we just use the Go structs as they exist today? So there's a key problem, which is in apply, you only send the fields that you want to own. So Go structs don't work for that because they have non-optional, like non-pointer field values that Go will zero value in if you don't provide anything. They're actually not that uncommon. I did a little audit. There's a ton of required Boolean fields all over the place that cause problems. So it looks like this would almost work, and it would kind of seem to work. But then if you actually get into the nitty-gritty and start using it for real stuff, you're going to run into really weird corner cases where you accidentally took ownership of fields that you didn't intend to, and maybe even set them to values that you didn't want to. So it's a little dangerous to go down that path. I'm going to describe two alternatives of doing this, and both have problems. So bear with me as we go through them. One of them is to use functions, and this is basically the builder pattern. You may have seen this in other programming languages. Basically, what you do is you say, I'm going to create a deployment type by calling a deployment function, and then you just chain calls to set various values for that. It still corresponds line by line, one-to-one with what we had in the Go struct. But you're using functions to do everything. If people have probably seen this in other programming languages, it looks very Java-like because of all the set calls. Another alternative would be to use pointers everywhere. This also has some really nasty quirks. So this one, it actually works not so bad when you're referencing other structs. You just have to put an ampersand in front of all of them now. But with primitive literals, Go is not quite as nice. And so if you don't get any utility support, you would have to like define the strings elsewhere. And actually, I did this wrong. Then you'd have to put ampersands in front of each of them. So you would actually have to have one of these everywhere. That's why you can't just put the string in line. And you could give yourself like a utility where you had like some pointer library that was like, new int32 pointer, and you just did that. You did that function call inline as well, and that kind of allows you to at least not have to define those string literals in a separate section up above. But it still dirties up the code quite a bit. I am currently favoring the builder's approach. I am not in love with either of these approaches, but I will at least make an argument for it. So I think having to construct the pointers for primitive literals is actually really inconvenient. And there's one advantage to the builders, which is functions can be part of an interface. And because we're defining a new representation of our types, we're now going to have two representations of those types. So there is actually potential usefulness to having an interface that they both share. And you could do that, right? You could have a Go struct that also implements the set function. There's nothing preventing you from doing that. And then you could have an interface that both these apply types have, and that the usual structs that you typically use for update and create and so forth also use. So there is that potential upside. Now on the Kubernetes Go client, we would then have a type-safe apply function, which would look like this. It's pretty basic. There's not a lot to say about this. I'm just showing it so people will know this would be new. We don't have this today. Right now, you can't call apply on the typed Go client. You can only do it on the I think it's called dynamic, the one that's untyped, and it just takes a byte array. So that's the end of my visual aids. The only big open question I have on this, on the proposal I have, at least the direction I'm heading, is do I really need to prefix everything with set? And there's the one main argument for doing that. I really don't like having to prefix everything with set, by the way, is that if we ever did take our existing Go structs and want to have them implement the interface, we can't do that if we name the function the same name as the field, because Go won't allow us to have both a field and a receiver function with the same name. So that's kind of the constraint that encouraged me to consider putting the sets in front of there. I don't really like it. I think it looks a lot nicer in the example with the builders if you take the set away. It actually starts looking like pretty straightforward. The main things I was looking for, I can go full screen again. And the reason I brought it to this group, one is since it's a controller runtime group, and this really is all about controllers, I think it's very important that this group know about what we're thinking about doing and get to see the design before we finalize anything, right? I've gone back and forth on what the best solutions are, and I've considered a bunch of others that are in the design doc. There's a link in the agenda and at the top of this presentation too, if you want to see the whole design doc and comment on it. I'd really like to get feedback on that. I'm also very interested in anybody who wants to try this out. I have a generator, it works. I have running examples. I can actually show one of those briefly. Here's a test in a PR of Kubernetes where I construct an entire deployment. I actually construct the same thing in the Go types just so I have something to compare against. We send the apply call right here. So this actually works end to end, right? Everything's together. It's all working. No surprises. We have a bunch of like fuzz-based round trip testing. So it's kind of all together, but the generator could be changed to generate something differently right now. But yeah, very interested in any volunteers. So if you are interested in trying this out, you could contact me on Slack. I would be totally interested in any help I can get trying it out. I can help to get the generator working with anybody that needs it working, as long as I can have reasonable guidance or some access to where we're putting the generator. It's also available in the PR, so it might be that some people are just able to kind of make sense of it and use it, but it's there. And that's it. I will open up for questions.
Yeah, can you? Sorry, go ahead, Solly.
No, Joe, go ahead. Or who was that? Actually,
Is Eric?
Eric, sorry.
Can you?
Eric,
No problem. Can you re-explain why a different type schema is necessary for this?
Yeah. So the problem is that when we define our Go structs, we don't make all the fields optional because some of them are required, and that's really convenient because then it means when you dereference into a field, you can say something. If it's required, it's going to be there, right? It'll get zero valued in by Go. You're not going to get a nil pointer exception doing that if it's a required field. You're guaranteed. It's not possible. So that's the way that we use Go structs today. We do that both in KubeBuilder and in Kubernetes types. So that's how how types exist. It's because there's a lot of things in our pointer types. So some fields are just some struct, but it's not a pointer. What that means is when you serialize those, and there's a bunch of cases, there's some cases where if something is the zero value that we do omit empty and we don't put it on the wire, but that's not always the case. There's a whole bunch of cases where we still put it on the wire. So basically what happens is you have these fields that are always included. Whenever you serialize an object, you're going to get a certain amount of things in there. And it might be only if you add like some substanza to the object, but once you add that, then a bunch of fields get pre-populated. That's not compatible with apply, because apply you should only include the fields that you really have an opinion about and want to say what their value is, because when you apply that, you're going to take ownership of those fields.
I've seen this be a problem when the struct has a Boolean, and when you try to do the apply, the 0 value is false, but you don't want to change it. So when it gets serialized, it's sending false, and then you end up changing your true back to false. And the only way to do it is make it a pointer, and that's your second solution, and that's annoying.
Yeah. Yeah, the Booleans are by far the most common. We actually wanted to see how much of a real problem this was before we fixed it. And what I found was the required Boolean fields were by far the most likely thing you were to hit. Yeah, it's an annoying problem. It would be great if the Go structs just worked. Changing them to work, unfortunately, also comes with a pretty heavy penalty. So I kind of, and in the Kubernetes types, I can't change them, right? Like they are part of the API. They are forever for my design purposes. So I have to assume that they're not going to be able to be changed. So I have to introduce something new, which means interop with the existing types is a consideration.
So I think what I was going to say earlier is I think the quickest, like the easiest way to make this test this out with existing controllers too, or might be existing controller runtime controllers might be just to make sure that so our patch function on our client has support for like pluggable patch types that can be implemented like either in tree controller runtime or out of tree. So if you wanted, I guess I can't speak for the other folks here, but like probably the easiest thing to do if you wanted folks with controller runtime controllers to try it out would just be to provide a pluggable patch type that you could use with our apply function, like as a snippet of code or in a library somewhere, and then
all right,
we could just drop it in an existing controller and call client dot patch with it.
That sounds great. Yeah, let me follow up on that, and then once we have something available, I can recirculate it with the group. I think that's a good idea.
Hey, quick question. So,
yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. When you said like it's annoying to work with the, I mean, I agree. It's annoying to work with the pointers to fundamental types, but what exactly is the friction you're worried about? Are you more worried about when you're reading them, or are you more worried about when you're trying to define like a struct literal with these pointers?
With apply, we are more concerned. Apply is write mostly. It's a write mostly use case. You write applies a lot more than you read them. We think there will be some read use cases. The truth is, reading them, no matter what you do, all the fields are optional. There's no getting around the fact you're going to have to check for the presence of things if you want to safely dereference into it. So that's actually not so much a disadvantage with the pointers. That's just a problem with apply. I think the thing that was, I mean, the two things that were biasing me towards the builders were, one, Go doesn't really make it easier to inline literal pointers. You can't just say ampersand quote string, right? Like logically, we know what you would be intending to do that, but Go just doesn't let you write that. You have to assign a variable to the string somewhere else and then reference it.
So I put a thing in the chat, which is what I always do, which is I just have these helper functions that they take the bool and they return a pointer to that bool, and that all works. Like it knows how to throw that into the heap, and that's having a few of those actually makes it not that bad to define.
Yeah, I think that helps. I think if we did the pointer approach, we would definitely want something like that, and we would have to somehow educate people to know that that's available and to use it, which is a little tricky, right? People might not necessarily know that. But
I mean, it sounds like there's education either way you go, because you have to teach them this whole thing, or you have to show them examples with that. I recognize the problem.
That's the trade-off. Yeah, and then the other advantage of the builders is that you get, since now we're introducing a second representation of types, there are some advantages to thinking about, well, are we going to want interfaces that both types can share? And so like, if we're going to do that, maybe we should just start with the interfaces, which is basically what the builders do. You build it, base everything around functions, and you can define interfaces for all that. And then other types can also implement those interfaces.
It's
So
also
you get
just
some interop.
it's also just so visually distinct that you potentially don't accidentally make a mistake, right? Like there's no like, oh, I accidentally passed like a concrete struct here versus a pointer only struct or whatever. Like,
Yeah,
it's just,
that's actually an upside.
The one downside I see with the builder is you end up with one method for every, I guess, attribute. Whereas with the pointers, you end up with a fixed number of helper functions. One for Boolean, one for string, one for int, those. So you have less, it seems almost less intrusive. It's not as nice to read. I think the builders are easier to read, but.
Yeah, it depends on how you're looking at it. If you're in an IDE and you're like, you've got some utility that shows you what options you have, you're either going to get a list of functions, you're going to get a list of fields, and they're going to be more or less one-to-one.
One drawback of the pointer approach, I think, is also that you could accidentally set a field in a substruct that's nil and then cause a panic. Because all the types are composed, right? So for example, you have a deployment that has a pod spec, and the pod spec has, I don't know, the image attribute. You set the image, but forgot to set the pod spec, then you cause a panic.
Right, but not in a literal. If you're doing a literal, you have to have the full path down there.
Yeah, but in the pointer approach, we would need to have everything be a pointer field, right?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing to notice about the pointer approach is actually any problem you're going to have with it, you're going to have today with the Go types, because we do make a bunch of stuff optional and they are pointers. So we already have some pointers. It just would be going from some pointers to all pointers. So we wouldn't be introducing any new problems. But if you have had a problem with pointers on the Go struct types, that same type of problem would apply here.
Do you have acceptance criteria defined for this? Is this going to be fairly subjective and just kind of a poll? And is there a time frame associated with
there's a couple main things that we want to achieve. One is that we want to show success with at least one Kubernetes built-in controller that it works. We had a bunch of testing criteria to make sure that it's actually sound, right? Like the soundness of this is really important. But I think the usability of this is really key, and so I want to do more than meet I kind of basically I want there to be a requirement where like enough people have tried this out and said like this works for me, it's ergonomic enough. Like I didn't like whatever rough edges we found, we looked at, we considered, we did the best we could. Like I don't want it to go out with like unnecessarily rough edges. After working on it for like a couple months, like I don't know how to get around some of the rough edges, but I would like us to try as hard as we can. And I think that there's probably some left. So I think having people bang on it, try the alternatives. It might be that like we actually generate the pointer structs at some point for people if somebody is very curious of what the alternatives feel like when they actually do development. Yeah, I would really like to get like a couple successful use cases where people tried this out, were able to do what they wanted to do, and gave some really good feedback.
I got a couple questions. Are these options mutually exclusive? Like, could you have the pointer structs, but then also have the builders that build the pointer structs?
They're not. In fact, right now, the way I have it implemented is I have an unexposed struct that with everything optional behind the builders, and I could just expose that, right? And like then you would have both. It's unclear to me if it's good to be that unopinionated about this to start with, because I doubled my API surface area pretty early on in the project. I mean, we could always add that later. But if we add it now and it becomes part of the API, we can never remove it. So I'm biasing towards trying to figure out which one of these two works the best as soon as I can. and then move forward from there. And maybe in the future, add both, or maybe it's the result of feedback from people. They do say like, actually, having both is okay, and I'm okay with that. If I got a bunch of feedback like that, we would definitely like reconsider it and just expose it, because it might be that like for everything but the primitive types, just using the fields is fine, right? And if somebody showed me some use case and said like, I actually like my pattern in usage was to do X, and it worked really good for me, then that would be pretty motivating.
Yes. So that maybe the related question I have is, have you thought about the case of unmarshalling into a struct? Like, let's say I have a YAML file that is the patch, and I want to unmarshal that and apply it. Does that work with the builder pattern?
Yeah. So right now the builder, I have a compatibility matrix. So you can take either a Go struct or YAML or this thing called unstructured, which is how we do a bunch of dynamic stuff in Kubernetes. You can get those into the apply structs and out of the apply structs. So you can move it around. So you could do something like start with a YAML, like load a YAML in to apply builders, make a couple hand changes with the builders to fields that are dynamic or that you're templating with, and then finish it out. Right. I'm not sure that's the best way to template, but it supports that. Right. That's possible.
Okay.
Or you could start. Yeah, or you could start with a Go struct and then like do something. That's a little sketchier because like you might accidentally default something in from 0 values, but you could do things like that.
Is there, so if the actual underlying structs are unexported, does that cause problems with wanting to pass those things around between functions?
No, the way, yeah, you don't even know they're there. Basically, you have like these apply configuration types that represent everything, and you compose everything on those.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Now, if we did expose the structs, we'd have to work out like what types we represent. But for example, one thing that we do is in the apply function that I generate, where you can actually call apply, so the server-side apply is run by the server. I only take an apply configuration. So right now you can't pass in a Go struct, and that's very deliberate, right? I don't want people to accidentally think that they can just pass in a normal Kubernetes Go struct because they can shoot themselves in the foot doing that. For the reasons we discussed earlier. So right now the two types are very distinct.
So the question, have you looked at how much all of this generated code affects binary size?
I can check. I actually expect it will have fairly negligible size because of Go, right? Like a Go is only going to include into the build, like your binary, what you actually used. So I expect that it's going to be pretty moderate, but we can check that.
I know this was introduced and probably appropriately so with a Go focus, but there are other clients. Is there any consideration at all on alignment to other languages? And it seems like the builder pattern would align probably better than pointer.
Yeah, I did think about it a little bit. I wanted to get one language right as a reference to start with, and that's typically been Go. I'm very interested in going and making sure that we do other things in the other languages. So any design feedback that people have that also applies to other languages would be really interesting, because I would like the next language implementation to be easier because we have like all the thoughts that we put into this one. So hopefully we can be a little bit successful in there. I don't know if we can provide super config guidance for all languages yet, but I think whatever we do here would guide a lot of type safe languages pretty well. And then hopefully for more dynamic languages, we could, start getting some learnings too.
I'd probably just briefly point out that a lot of modern type safe languages don't have the rough edges around the optional fields that Go has.
Yeah.
So like if you look at Rust, for instance, you have like a concrete option type, which makes it easier to define optional values inline. And then if you're looking at like dynamic languages like Python, right, you have support for like making any field none, potentially. So like
yeah.
that is like, I think I have a suspicion that there's better idiomatic patterns in many other languages, but that's just a hunch.
Yeah, And I wouldn't want to prescribe something onto the other languages that wouldn't be a good fit idiomatically for them, right? So maybe some of the best feedback is why you need to make sure that apply is doing what you think it's going to do in your language, why you can't just assume that your existing types work. Maybe they do, but maybe some of that guidance. And then there might be some languages where it's a little bit better of a fit, but like any language that has an option type, I think like it should probably use it and use it appropriately.
Two other questions. So is this going to be prescriptive? This would be the only interface to apply?
This, well, at least for right now, there's 0. So I'm going from 0 to 1, at least in Kubernetes itself. So for client Go, well, I'm going from you have the option of passing in a byte array of YAML or JSON to having that or this. And I'm hoping that we come up with an approach that would also work well with whatever we do in KubeBuilder and controller runtime, which is part of the motivation of coming to this group. Like I've gone a little bit back and forth on what the best approaches are, but I'm hoping that we can reach agreement on where the trade-offs, you know, what is best given the trade-offs that we have, so that whatever we do in KubeBuilder for apply in this space is very similar. I don't like right now, I'm just like, I have a very specific implementation that uses like GoGen, which has certain constraints. So you might not be using the same generator, but you know, if the approach makes sense, then presumably we would kind of follow the same pattern.
But when you were talking earlier about the shared interfaces, is the intent to be passing around these builders and doing like a late build, or because that's not necessarily how I'd think about traditional builders. You kind of like build them and then pass around the concrete types.
Yeah, so basically the way the builder works is it's not actually called a builder when you call the types. It's called like an applied configuration type. So you have like a deployment applied configuration, and you just call set on it, and sets just happen to return that same object again, so you can chain them. But you end up with an object, and that object is the representation of that thing. So you don't actually have to call like a .build at the end. That's the way I'm imagining this. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And so
okay.
You'd be expected to pass this around. Like I'm really interested in that interoperability and how prescriptive this is. I think that there's going to be a lot of subjectiveness around I like to use structs because that's Go, right? Like, and so I wonder how, and I look at this and it's like, oh, this looks like Java. No, thank you. So I think I wonder if there's room to leave choice to the actual users.
Probably the best way to leave choice would be to expose the fields and take that trade-off. We could, yeah, I think the two are either we would agree that pointers are actually the way to go, and we're going to take that hit, or we expose both, like we expose both the setters and the fields and let people pick, or those would probably be the two that would go that route.
And that's what protobuf does, right?
I think it does. Does it do both? I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would be very curious. In fact, what we might want to do if we do a controller runtime experiment would be to expose both and let people try, and then have them come back and tell me like, I tried both and I ended up using this one, and here's why. That might actually be a better experiment than just like giving them one.
I think what might be slightly different, the example that I remember you showing was kind of from Greenfield, right? You're creating a deployment. You know, from a controller standpoint, what I would expect is I'm pulling something out of a cache and when making a copy and then making some modifications. And my thoughts currently are around, you know, what would that look like?
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
That's actually an anti-pattern with server-side apply. If you read the existing object, you're going to take ownership of fields that you didn't intend to. With server-side apply, you always want to specify from scratch by and large.
So
it sounds like
you don't need to do reroute.
Yeah.
You don't really need to do a read modify, right? You just figure out what the state of the fields you care about are and write them unconditionally usually.
You like I to your point, maybe I realize I interrupted you a bit there. like there may be a few fields where you're setting them based on other things, but a lot of the stuff I've seen, like you end up constructing most of the object like wholesale.
Yeah, a lot of my experience hasn't been upgraded to the server side of play yet, so I'm a little bit behind, but I appreciate it. It's great stuff.
Awesome. Well, I've got a bunch of useful feedback. Thank you, everybody. I will follow up, and I will probably circle back with in the next meeting just to let people know where we're at and what's available.
All right. Thanks for presenting, Joe, and sharing with us and stuff. Definitely look forward to seeing what happens there and being able to give feedback and stuff.
Thank you.
Looks like the next thing on our agenda is from Zeus.
Yes.
Yeah, so go ahead.
I added a agenda for the wondering when 0.7 is slated for release for controller runtime. We're trying to plan for Kubernetes 120 and kind of figuring out the timeline, because we assume that 0.7 needs to come out before we can start doing any 120 work. And so I just wanted to check where we were with that.
Yeah, Vince, I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but I think you probably have you and Camilla, I think, and Gabby probably have some of the best knowledge of like the state of things. I think there was at least one thing that we wanted to tackle that might be a breaking change that we might want to tweak before 0.7. But do y'all remember anything else?
So I guess like most of for controller runtime specifically, most of it is actually ready. Apart from the webhooks v1, right now we still speak of v1 beta 1 admission review, and that required some changes as well in controller tools. There was a whole conversation with Jordan Leggett. In terms of timeline, I honestly don't know, given that I don't know, I haven't been able to concentrate this week that much, but we can set like a specific date. I don't know, maybe 2 weeks from now. So the 19th, 20th, we can probably release 0.7.0. But tags are available for alpha if you want to check it out, and we can use those. For 0.20, well, for 120, like if we want to update dependencies and like cut 0.8 right after we cut 0.7, I'm also okay with that.
Are there breaking or are there blockers? I know you mentioned like the admission webhook stuff. Is that a blocker for 0.7 being released, or is that a nice to have?
I don't have time to do it right now, but like there is, I would like to fix it before we release, because that caused me and others like a lot of confusion, and like I like to pretend that I know a bit about controller runtime. So if it's causing trouble to me, like it probably is going to cause trouble to others. And we need to document all the breaking changes as well, which is that I would consider a release blocking thing.
Yeah, I guess my follow-up question then is related to that. There's going to be a bunch of breaking changes in 0.7 that impact I think they impact how we scaffold projects. Correct me if I'm wrong. So if that happens, then we also need to block a KubeBuilder release. Well, we can keep releasing KubeBuilder to be using 0.6, but when we go to 0.7, we will need basically a brand new plugin. Because we're going to make a bunch of breaking changes in the scaffolding. So I assume what we're probably going to do, unless people disagree with this, is to hold the v3 Go plugin that's currently like, the next one up, wait for that to wait for 0.7 to be released in controller runtime and then update that to use 0.7? Is that what we think the plan is?
That seems reasonable to me.
Otherwise, we'd have to go like almost immediately to V4, which seems like a bad experience for people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got an issue open in the KubeBuilder repo that details what we need to do. Right now, it's just update KubeBuilder declarative pattern, which I have a PR for.
And it's
And then-
just for V3, sorry.
Yeah, just for V3.
Are there other user-facing breaking changes or KubeBuilder-facing breaking changes that we want to make that are not in master yet, or not slated for 0.7 yet? Because that would basically, again, necessitate when we go out with 0.8, that would mean a V4 KubeBuilder plugin. So I'm wondering, like, do we want to try to get all the breaking changes in now so that when we bump to 0.8, KubeBuilder doesn't have to have a new plugin?
I think
But
that
it-
was, oh, go
Sorry.
ahead, Kumla.
No, just I would like to understand, because for example, if we, in my mind, just to clarify, if we release KubeBuilder now, we have a 3.0 of the CLI. We have the V2 plugin as default that cannot have a break changes, and all break changes can still go into V3 alpha. But when we make V3 alpha stable, then we cannot so longer work with the break change on that, and you need to do the V4 or a new one about that.
Yes. Yeah, sorry, I'm talking about V3. I'm talking about the V3 Alpha plugin.
So I think in my mind it would be very safe. We do a release now with V3 Alpha, but after we need another release when we will do V3 be stable, you know. And then the full one. Probably
I think-
3 releases I was in mind.
So I think, like, let me step back, and Jesus, if you have anything else to add, go for it. But I think what we're really getting at here is 0.19 is like we're on track to get controller runtime supporting 0.19 about the time that, or 1.19, about the time that 1.20 is going to be coming out, I think. I don't know, maybe it'll be like a month early. But I think what I'm suggesting, and I'm hoping we can start driving towards, is having controller runtime much more closely aligned with the upstream Kubernetes version, such that when 1.20 goes GA, we're, maybe no more than a week later, we have a version of controller runtime and a version of KubeBuilder that supports the latest GA. Maybe that's a pipe dream, but that's kind of what I'm hoping we can do.
We have done that in the past. It varies from release to release. Sometimes we have a release out real quick.
Right.
And sometimes we're real slow with things just for whatever. Like, that's not a judgment. That's just for whatever reason.
Yeah, and some of that I think is definitely understandable. Like we had the 1.18 where a whole ton of stuff broke with client Go. That might have taken a little longer. In this case, we have a whole bunch of breaking changes on 0.7 that are going to necessitate some changes to KubeBuilder. That's going to take a little longer. So I guess I'm hoping, like, we're far enough in advance of 1.20 now that if we can talk about all the things that need to go in what order, then we might be able to make 1.20 faster. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. In terms of timeline, can we just say, like, maybe the 19th to 20th, like a week target for controller runtime? So before Thanksgiving, at least.
Should we, what day is the next of these meetings? Should we sync next meeting and try to make sure, like, in the interim 2 weeks we're good and we get all the features in and we do all the review, and then do a sync next meeting, make sure there's nothing final that's about to explode, or we realize that we left a pizza in the oven and it's about to burn or something. And if we're good next meeting, then we just release that day.
Yeah, it should line up. It's the 19th, as Jesus pointed out in chat.
Okay. Anybody have any concerns with that plan?
That seems good to me. Do we have, like, do people know that there's work to do and that we expect them to do it?
I
guess
let's send out an email on the mailing list and on the Slack channel, and we'll just say like, hey, 2 weeks till this happens. If there's anything we need to get in, let's do that now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm obviously happy to volunteer to help out with that. Are we just looking at the v07.x milestone and like that's the list?
I think so. In case unless anyone raises any last minute changes.
Okay.
Yeah, Joe, if you could send out that email, that would be awesome.
Yep, I can do that.
Has one thing that maybe someone here could help, has pull requests that I put in the chat. If someone could review and approve, I believe it will be helpful for we try to update the KubeBuilder pre-alpha.
Yeah.
I don't have the permission.
Yeah, I think that's my PR, so I can follow up with Justin, I guess, who's assigned to that PR in the Kubernetes Slack.
Thanks, folks. That answers my question.
All right. Camilla, was the next one just a request for someone to do the push?
Yeah, I have two things. Yes, the push, I need to help you with that. It's really been boring, but yeah, I don't have the permissions. So.
Yeah, was this just a, I guess, we're expecting upstream next release to actually be part of core Kubernetes, right?
I spoke with the rep owner. He told you that he would keep me in the loop, but he didn't start the process to donate besides the intention. So I don't know how long it will take, but I will ping him again.
Can we just get like a cloud build script for our purposes then, so that like we don't have to ping someone with permission to push directly every time?
Sure.
Because like there's very few people on the hot path right now that have permissions to push directly to that registry, which I think is like probably a good thing. Like we don't want too many people with direct write permissions. We'd rather have automation and CI doing the push. I would prefer to have it be similar to the way we do our release tools and stuff like that, where it's just like we have cloud build and we tag a tag on a branch and it just pushes. I would prefer to have something set up like that instead of just having to have people manually tag and push.
Sure. Makes sense. We don't know how long can take the donation process. So yeah.
Yeah, that's my thought. Yeah, and I also apologize for being real, like unresponsive.
No worry. I know that you have too much on your plate. No worry. So the other thing about we did it using SDK. we need to migrate Travis because the person has the information in the issue. And I also was thinking, why not we replace the Travis by GitHub Actions if nobody has objections to that?
Yeah, we already have a bunch of stuff on Actions anyway, and I never finished pushing it because it few has some rough edges, but I can push it. I had some code actually that I worked on that takes the results of our a lot of our test runs and pipes them into GitHub Actions in a way that we see like inline code annotations for the all individual test runs in addition to like the lints and stuff, which means like, you know, nicer test output. You can just like view them as comments on the code, or check run annotations is the technical term. So I would be in favor of doing that, assuming there's no like serious performance implications or like budget, like assuming we don't accidentally burn through like org budget for GitHub Actions or something, but I think we're probably good there. So I would be good with that.
Yeah. Really nice to know. And if a science-TCO engine, I think it's possible. We probably migrate to GitHub Actions, but if I see that we are not able to achieve the goal in the timeline, I will ping you just to migrate. I believe Joe's GDTs in SDK was easy. I don't think I have the permissions just because that I need some. We need some that has the permissions to do.
Okay, yeah. Ping me, and I can do a switch over. I seem to recall last time we had to do a switch over like that with Travis. It was pretty straightforward. So
yeah, but let's try to move it for GitHub Actions. I think it would be nice, really nice. Really thank you.
I agree. Cool, awesome. All right, and then I think the last one was Kevin.
Yeah, so just real quick, a few meetings ago, we discussed a proposal for enabling greater control over the controller lifecycle, specifically by making it possible to shut down individual informers. One of the big open questions is whether we could get upstream support from Client Go and SIG API machinery to make it possible for shared informers to shut themselves down under certain conditions, such as when the CRD it's watching is uninstalled from the cluster, and also seeing if we could get greater support on tracking the event handlers that are installed on the informers, so being able to remove them or count the number of event handlers. And so I put together a proposal and a work in progress implementation for how we would do that upstream, and brought it up with SIG API machinery yesterday at their biweekly meeting. And so far everyone seemed pretty on board. So we got the green light there, and that's kind of the next steps for this, is just to push forward the upstream changes with SIG API machinery, and then circle back and update the controller runtime stuff along the way. And I don't know, that's just the update there.
Awesome. Does anybody else have anything that they would like to discuss on that point, or anything else that's not on the agenda that they want to discuss?
What are the next steps with them?
So what are the next steps with this?
With changes in this API machinery.
Yeah, so I've got a work in progress implementation up now, and basically just continuing on that PR. And there's right now it's in a state where it works for our use case and for the the resource quota controller. So one of the big things is that we wanted a solution that both works for us and also works for the current issue that controller manager is seeing, where the inability to shut down informers kind of creates log spam in garbage collector and resource quota. And so resource quota is working, but the garbage collector is a bit more nuanced, or has a bit more complexity to it. So I think gonna have to work through how it's gonna work there. But I don't know, I think it's just pushing that PR forward and hopefully landing it in API machinery sometime in the next few weeks or so is kind of the next steps there.
Cool.
All right. If nobody else has anything they'd like to discuss, we are almost at the hour, so perfect timing. I'll see y'all in a couple weeks.
Thanks. See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.